category that we call emerging churches, right? And the question was, what did I mean by these new forms, and what does that look like? And they actually are quite varied right now, but a number of them have been kind of juxtaposed into this broad category of emerging churches. And if you Google that or whatever, and we have even we're doing some work with that at Wesley, but if you Google emerging churches, you see a whole category, quite various types of ministries, all trying to respond to this context that I believe Pastor Rudy is talking about.
Yes. My name is Marcus. I guess my question is, I read some of the book. As a young man who is aspiring to be a pastor, who feels very much what you talk about in your book as a young man, I was ordained in the local church, I was licensed in the local church, but still restricted to express my creativity. Restricted because what happens, I've seen in my young, every institution that is connected to the church is in decay. And then to use your analogy about the skeleton, I feel as if the institutions are yelling what the prophet Ezekiel said, can these bones live? And I say, as the person, no, they're dead. Let's recreate. But what institutions are teaching us is that we take what has been taught and you use it for your context, and it doesn't fit. So as an insurgent, which I claim to be, how do, in 2009, Lecrae Moore, Christian hip hop artist, came out with an album called Rebel, talking about rebelling against the culture, not against Christianity, rebelling against the culture to effecting change. So how do we take the energy, the zeal that we have as youth for change when we're really taught to conform when we get to the place of change? And then instead of being that one voice for change, they end up getting muffled by the majority who do not want change. How do we create within that body that same sense of insurgency?
I believe the movement is recreating itself. So, for instance, we went from small rural churches to mid-sized city churches, to big boxes, and there are only really a few big boxes. There really are. As a matter of fact, and Best Buy is getting ready to make some more big box space available. You know, I've been talking to some of my colleagues who run big boxes like ours, and ours is really sort of a bigger crowd in a mid-sized box, and they are concerned. So, for instance, all of the big box guys and ladies in Houston who manage what we call mega churches have all experienced a decline in giving in Houston. That decline in giving is a trend, and if the trend continues, as a matter of fact, all of my colleagues in Houston have had significant personnel cuts this year. We're in April. Yeah, and this. The cuts began around November. Some of the largest churches that I'm familiar with in the Houston area have all cut their staff. We cut our staff. We laid off 30 people in November, in the process of laying off a few more in the next couple of weeks. times are changing. I said that to say this. The movement is becoming smaller and more effective. If you look at it in military terms, you know, there were days when people would line men up and they would stand flat-footed and just shoot at each other. They would do that. But that was a method of war. And then but the methodology changed. Context. Look here. And so, as a young man, let me personalize. As a young man, if I was in your spot right now, I don't think I would be waiting to be accepted by one of the boxes, big, medium, or small. I would find a venue of sorts, and not a formal venue, but I would find a spot, and I would gather my folk. If you leave, John Maxwell, in some of his plagiarism way back, said if you are taking a walk and ain't nobody following you, yeah. You know, if you think you're leading and nobody's following you, just taking a walk. That's what he said. So you test your skill, and you attempt to get 5 people to roll with you. They just talk, and those 5 people become your core. I know some gangsters who do that like really effectively, and now they have hundreds and possibly thousands of people they can just call and say, you know, go get it, and they go get it. You know, with the risk of incarceration and everything, death and everything. We just telling folk, let's go get it. We're talking about going to get Jesus, all right? We're talking about life. So it's the possibility for you right now is greater than it is for me. And I'll tell you why. I was telling the folk in another venue that I have what I call right now some platinum handcuffs on me. That means I make so much money right now, I can't quit. You know, I can't walk away. Well, I can. But what about my car? That's a real question. You're free. And you're free to create and to imagine and reimagine and really changing the church and the ultimate existence of the church is going to depend on brothers like you using their creativity to gather people in a new way for a war that's very different.
You've asked the hardest question. The how question is always the hardest question, right? Because how Rudy did it in his context, with his gifts, his skills, his luck, his blessing, his wife, his folk, his friends, won't be how you will do it because you can't. How I do it in my place is not how Fred can do it, right? So not only is it contextual based, but how is so fickle. So you have to figure out that you're going to do it.
Right.
And then the how starts to unfold. What you can depend on is you will both succeed and fail. You will make mistakes. You better learn how to apologize now before you start working on your how. Right? Folks will tell you you can't, and 1 or 2, if you were like me, my mother said, you can do anything you want to do, baby. So you got to find somebody that says you can do anything you want to do, baby. Right? You need at least that.
Yeah.
But the how, you have to realize the depth and the magnitude of the how question. We don't know the answer. And if anybody tells you how to do it, they're lying to you. There's no formula, there's no recipe, there's no Jiffy Pop popcorn to this thing. You got to figure it out yourself. That's for you to figure it out.
I'll take a piece too. I had on the last session, probably during the last week before I graduated with my MDiv, my theology professor prayed this profound prayer. Actually, Daniel Migliore, he's pretty much known to the song. And Professor Migliori, part of the prayer that blew us away was, he prayed, Lord, let them forget everything that was taught here that was not useful. Yeah. You heard that? Basically, in light of this context, the same thing, the same challenges that we're talking about that the church must wrestle with, theological education must wrestle with the same context. And just like some have argued that there are zombie categories in the church, there are zombie categories in the seminary as well. I just had to make sure nobody was cutting my check. All of you that are in my classes, I see all of you here, right? But that's the truth of the matter. You know, you're going to need to make your own way of recognizing that everything that's being taught to you right now is not going to be useful to you.
Let me just say that we are going to use the mics because some folks in the back can't hear, and that mic on the table will work.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Wally Schneider. I'm from Christ United Methodist Church here in Washington, D.C. You say on page 14, the original dream of the Methodists was simple. Create a free-flowing structure that allows for movement, innovation, and growth. So doesn't this creativity have to come from below, from the local church going up? And doesn't the church have to, greater church have to create those differences and that creativity, those how to do it? I mean, is there just too much of a structure now for us to really be able to do this in the church?
You know, when professionals institutionalize a movement and began to do what's called wage administration, it's making sure everybody makes the right amount of money for the job assigned based on the description. Fear becomes the biggest impediment to growth and change. And it is the fear that, the fear of insufficiency that drives the current process more than anything else. So in a week, there'll be discussions taking place in Tampa. And all of the discussions will ultimately be curtailed when somebody holds up that particular clergy person's pension statement and asks the question, are you willing to sacrifice your pension for a change? And the answer for the last 50 years has been absolutely not. Let someone else suffer, but leave my pension alone. It's going to be interesting. I don't have ordination, so I can't really be stripping my orders. I do have some people that I consider family. People who joined the church over the last 20 years, and there have been times that their faces have silenced my discord. I believe for those of us in the last half, our work should be focused on encouraging young people to do whatever it is. See, the challenge with that is us old heads, we have an idea as to how it ought to go. But to release
this next generation to do the work that they have been called to do. Will look as, probably it will look as crazy as my beard does to my 80-year-old mom right now. I was with her yesterday. She looked at me like, that's the craziest. She's been looking at me like that. I'm 55, all right? She's been looking at me like that most of my life. But it's safe. But I realize in that as she looks at me and wonders, like, what are you up to? But has released me to be me. We will have to release others. Yeah, and in that, I think, others who don't have their lives tied to pension statements and their wrist and platinum cups. My fighting right now is through press releases. I'm in a different place in the struggle. But I'm even thinking now, about the validity of even I'll say it like this. Well, one of my very close friends started ministry with us. He was a young guy at the time. Now he's an older guy now, 20 years later. But I remember about 15 years ago, he called me one morning. He was terrified, and he had a nightmare. And his name was Mike. Mike called him. He said, Rudy, this you? I said, yeah, man. He said, man, I just woke up. I had a nightmare. I said, so what was the nightmare, Mike? He said, man, I dreamed that we were talking, and we were at church, and you said, Mike, you didn't know we were just playing? This ain't real? And I visit that often, that conversation. I think if we are not playing, then we are ready at all costs to save the movement that Jesus began.
Hey, my name's Lindy, and I'm a first-year Urban Fellow student here at Wesley. And I was struggling with how to phrase this question, so I'll try to do it as simply as I can. But right now I'm in a class on Christian hospitality, and a lot of what we're talking about in there comes down to like how two souls interact, how two people meet one another, and what that guest-host relationship looks like. So I was curious from each of your personal experiences, like how do you, on a very day-to-day, one-on-one business, how do you feel like this belief in this insurgency or the revolution impacts those very minute personal reactions? Does that make sense? Maybe?
Let me try. I had you until the last phrase, and then I didn't know how we got to the end. Thinking about and being intentional about habits and practices are important to me. So thinking about hospitality as a habit and practice of love, as a habit and practice of radicalism, as a habit and practice of being a disciple of Jesus is part and parcel to not only how I live my personal life, but how I'm trying to teach. So welcoming the stranger and not diminishing the stranger into being the strange is very important. Being cognizant that there is no political neutrality. When we're in the classroom together, I'm still a black woman, and the white men think they have no power even in my own classroom, because they do. But there is still necessity for me to offer hospitality even in that moment, and still being cognizant of the politic in that moment. So the habits and practices, and seeing hospitality as a habit and practice that is not benign or neutral or nice, but has built into it the radicality of love of Jesus, is very important.
Hi, my name's Kyle. I'm a first year MDiv student at Wesley, and a lot of the phrase you guys use tonight, the church is dying or the church is dead, is something that I often hear a lot as a young seminarian. And recently, I believe it was last year, late last year, the Methodist Church issued their call to action, which I think it was 10 years younger in 10 years, or they had some kind of dramatic statistic to show how the church was dying and how desperately we need to kind of get back. But that's not really a very inspiring call for a young seminarian, especially, you know, so I'm just kind of wondering, where do you personally, for all three of you, where do you see areas of hope or areas of grace that are being expanded, or that we, the future generation, should expand upon?
You know, the fact that you're in the room and asking the question is hope in itself. And I think what you're hearing is a statistic. That's a fact that most Methodist clergy are, I think 80% are 55 years old or older, and that's a reality. And as realities goes, without some younger people asking the question, and the doctor said, not switching to law school and staying there.
Can you say that?
That's the reality.
I whispered up here from law school.
You know, it's that's an option. And we're seeing that option exercised a lot. B school, law school, I mean, that's a, but you know what I'm finding? This is the refreshing. This is the refreshing. In my move around the planet, I am meeting people like you, who are saying, I may not know exactly what life holds, but it holds something. And I am willing to venture out into a wilderness and experience that. And I'm taking in my travels, and like I go everywhere. And I'm always the oldest cat there. Right? I was the only African American I saw in India. I'm telling you, African Americans can't buy tickets to India. Long story. But you and others who are willing to at least postpone prosperity for the sake of a better world. I'm in a dialogue right now with some folk from around the country who are asking the question, why aren't young African Americans connecting in missions? And I've been answering the question at every stop. It's because when you see yourself as a mission, it's hard to embrace a vocation in missions. But beyond that, I think we're going to have to make this kind of hope contagious beyond young whites. I'm excited that you're at least in the process of thinking about those options. But I think the movement needs diversity in order to really change the world. Otherwise, we have another caste system of missionaries who find themselves serving a darker world.
I mean, my hope is in that there was a Christ before Christianity. And whether this form of Christianity falls or doesn't fall, Christ still exists. So my hope is in that truth, not in the institutional church. Though it grieves me, part of what you hear is people grieving over an institution that was very formative and loving and supportive and traditionalizing and constricting and so it's always that mixed bag of any kind of human relationship. But I don't have concerns about will the Christ live on after Christianity. Yes, I have no doubt about that. But I do have a question for Rudy. Now that we're talking about it. You mentioned at the end about when you were 8 and you had the first conscious encounter that you can recall about being dehumanized. My question is, and you said you got angry and you've been fighting about that. Did you believe that lie, or have you been trying to rid yourself of that lie?
God, man. Actually, I just crossed that last week there. That was couch. And the fact is, I believe the lie. And a guy, as a matter of fact, it happened when I was 8 and 9. When I was 8, I got off of the bus, and that story's in the book. I got off of the bus at Wolf's Pharmacy. My aunt and I went to the soda counter, and she was a college student, I was 8. And we sat down at the counter, and Mr. Wolf, who I drank soda at his counter before, screamed at us and said, "You don't belong at this counter." And I remember the fear that my aunt embodied in that moment, and it etched a place in my brain. The next year, I was in W.T. Grant, and I needed to use the restroom, and I went to the restroom, and there was a dime machine on the colored stall, but the white stall didn't have any. You could just turn the knob and go in. So I turned the knob and went in, and as I was exiting, a white male screamed at me, "You don't belong in that restroom." And along the way, the journey just continued, and I began to develop a defense. And my defense was outrun them. Whoever them was. So I started running when I was 8, 9 years old, and the mantra was, you can run, but you can do anything but lose. You cannot lose. Which basically created a fierce competitor. I discovered along the way that fierce competitor ended up with Jesus. And it takes on different forms. So for me, happened, it took on a big church. A lot of people in control. And ever since that person told me I couldn't, I have been defying that. And today, as a matter of fact, I encountered a caste system in India that ripped my heart out. And in that caste system, I saw myself. I saw myself in America. And what's happened for the most part, everything my dad told me about Jesus has manifested. And what he told me was, Big Shot, he can't do it for you. And my dad was talking about money, capital, cash, dinero. But what we learned together, he died 8 years ago as a Christian. What we learned 8 years ago, what I'm learning right now, is it's the only escape from the caste I have. My identity in Christ.
We'd like to thank our panelists for Please remain seated. Rashid is going to come with some announcement for us.
Are you going to